Welcome back to CIA Declassified. Today we're opening CIA-RDP96-00787R000500090007-3. This is a document from the Grill Flame and Stargate collection, but it doesn't involve psychics. It involves a radio telescope, specifically the Ooty Radio Telescope in Tamil Nadu, India. In the early 1970s, the CIA was funding a very specific kind of research, radio scintillation. To the layperson, that's just the twinkling of radio waves from distant stars. But to the CIA's Office of Research and Development, it was a way to track things in our atmosphere that didn't want to be seen. Let's look at the location. The Ooty telescope is a massive cylindrical paraboloid, 530 meters long and 30 meters wide. It was completed in 1970 by the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research under the direction of Professor Govind Swarup. It's built on a natural slope of 11 degrees, which perfectly matches the latitude of the site, allowing it to track radio sources for 9 hours a day by rotating its long axis. The CIA document reveals that the agency was monitoring high-latitude scintillation events. Specifically, they were interested in the interplanetary scintillation, or IPS, data. This isn't just background noise. IPS is caused by the solar wind, a stream of charged particles flowing from the sun at speeds between 300 and 800 kilometers per second. The report explicitly states the variations in intensity of radio sources known as scintillation are caused by irregularities in the plasma medium through which the waves pass. Why? Because when a radio wave from a distant quasar passes through our ionosphere, it gets distorted. Usually that distortion is caused by solar wind, but the agency's analysts noticed localized density gradients that shouldn't be there. In the report, they describe these as discrete, non-expanding plasma bubbles that remain stationary over specific geographic coordinates for hours at a time. And the document notes that these bubbles exhibited a, quote, refractive index variance that was 3 orders of magnitude higher than the surrounding ambient ionosphere, end quote. In physics terms, that's like finding a brick wall in the middle of a fog bank. The briefing takes a sharp turn when it discusses the South Atlantic Anomaly, or the SAA. This is a dent in Earth's magnetic field where the inner Van Allen radiation belt comes closest to the planet's surface, as low as 200 kilometers. This is the Bermuda Triangle of space. The document cites data logs showing that these scintillation nodes were appearing with 400% higher frequency within the SAA. The agency's scientists, including references to Dr. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, the men who practically founded the CIA's remote viewing programs, theorized that the reduced magnetic pressure in the SAA allowed for propulsionless metric adjustments to occur with less energy expenditure. Essentially, if you are an unknown craft trying to park in Earth's orbit without using fuel, you park in the hole in the magnetic field where the magnetic flux density, symbolized as capital B, is at its absolute minimum. The Ooty telescope caught the radio shadow of these objects. The report includes a startling quote. The observational evidence suggests that these phenomena are not merely natural fluctuations of plasma, but represent a stable, structured intervention in the magnetospheric flow. These are not weather patterns, they are architectures. This is the core of our deep dive. We are going to read through the data tables on page 14 of the report, which analyze the power spectrum analysis of the received signals. The logs record source 3C273, the very first quasar ever identified, located 2.4 billion light years away. On October 14, 1973, OT was tracking 3C273. The data shows a, quote, sharp onset of 10 hertz fluctuations, end quote. The document notes, the fluctuation period does not correspond to known ionospheric drift velocities. While solar wind typically produces a scintillation frequency between 0.1 and 2 hertz, the detected 10 hertz signal suggests a source of modulation moving at relativistic speeds or fixed in a high-frequency vibrational state, end quote. To understand the weight of this, solar wind moves like a river. The signal moved like a hummingbird. Something was sitting between the telescope and the star. Something that was vibrating at a frequency that matches the theoretical torsion field signatures we discussed in the last episode. The agency wasn't just observing stars. They were using the stars as a backlight to find the silhouettes of invisible structures in our own upper atmosphere. They were measuring the scintillation index, symbolized as S sub 4. In the logs, the S4 index hit a value of 1.0, meaning total saturation. Something solid was in the way. The CIA didn't just have radio data. They were correlating the OT logs with ground-based visual reports of, quote, luminous atmospheric phenomenon, often referred to in the documents as LAP. The report mentions Pilot Report 73A. A commercial crew flying near the equator reported a, quote, stationary, glowing toroid or donut-shaped object at 60,000 feet. This height is critical because it is well into the stratosphere, far above most weather. When the CIA cross-referenced the time of this sighting with the Ooty scintillation data, they found a total signal blackout, that's a quote, total signal blackout, in that sector. The toroid wasn't just reflecting light, it was absorbing or refracting the radio waves from the deep space sources Ooty was trying to track. The agency concludes that these objects are metamaterial in nature, capable of manipulating the local refractive index of the vacuum. A specific memorandum attached to the file states, the correlation between visual UAP sightings and the S4 saturation events at Ooty provides new baseline for electronic intelligence, or ELINT, gathering on non-conventional aerial platforms. We are no longer looking for metal. We are looking for the absence of space, end quote. Why keep this in the Stargate files? Because the agency realized that if they could replicate these scintillation nodes, they could create a radio shield. The document ends with a recommendation to continue funding small-scale scintillation studies under the guise of academic astronomy. They didn't want the Soviets to know that we had a way to detect their stealth satellites by looking at the stars behind them. This is the foundation of what would later become the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, also known as Star Wars. The report notes a final chilling observation. The behavior of the stationary nodes over the Nilgiri Hills suggests an intelligence that is aware of the Ooty array's duty cycle. The nodes frequently dissipate exactly 120 seconds before the telescope's receiver is deactivated for daily maintenance, end quote. They weren't just being watched, they were being timed. The data in RDP96-00787R000500090007-3 suggests that the great boat we talked about last isn't just a memory of Mars. It's a reality of our own atmosphere, tracked by radio telescopes in the 1970s. We are living in a sea of invisible structures. In our next episode, we move from the sky to the streets. We have covered the psychics, the telescopes, and the satellites. Next, we're going to cover some domestic shadows. We're going to dig into CIA-RDP98-04723A00010016 0004-3. This is a document from Project Merrimack. While the world was watching the Vietnam War, the CIA was running a secret program to infiltrate American protest groups like the Women's Strike for Peace and the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE. But they weren't just using agents. They were using Project Merrimack to monitor what the documents call the, quote, biological and psychological resonance, end quote, of crowds. The document details the deployment of, quote, specialized sensors, end quote, hidden in plain sight to track the, quote, collective emotional output, end quote, of large gatherings in Washington, D.C. It involves a medical liaison officer and a technology called the bioamplifier. We are going to look at the day the CIA decided that the American public wasn't just a group of citizens, but a biological field to be harvested, analyzed, and eventually tuned. See you in the shadows and also in the archives.